Okay, so welcome everybody to this session. Before we get started, I want to make sure everybody's familiar with the controls on Zoom webinar. You will have the Q&A function is active, so please feel free to post your questions in that tool. We will have some time for answering those questions towards the end of the hour. This session is going to be recorded and it will be available afterwards. Apologies if there are any technical issues or connectivity glitches. If we're disconnected, then please do rejoin the meeting, but we should be okay. So let's start. My name is Josie Ann. I'm a member of the Children's Rights and Business team at UNICEF here in Geneva, and I focus on the digital sector. It's a pleasure to see so many different participants on the call. Before we get started, here's the agenda for today's session. We have a lot to get through. The aim of today is to launch the UNICEF's new recommendations for the online gaming industry on assessing impact on children. So we'll talk about what the recommendations are and how they were made and how you can use them. But we'll also hear directly from different voices from the industry who will share their own perspectives and experiences on these issues. So we'll start with a welcome note, talk a bit about the recommendations, hear from the EGDF, LEGO, and MTG, and then I have an investor perspectives from CBIS. Then we'll talk about some next steps and close with Q&A and some closing remarks. So without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Wavina for a welcome note.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Josiane. Welcome, everyone, for joining. Thanks for joining this launch of UNICEF's new recommendations for the online gaming industry on assessing impact on children. And I want to begin by acknowledging that these recommendations benefited from the inputs of a wide variety of industry stakeholders. So I'm very glad to see who's online with us today. Thanks to all of you who contributed, and I'm really looking forward to hearing directly from several companies during this session. I'm not going to belabor my opening remarks because the hour is short and the number of really interesting opinions and inputs from all of you we should really make time for. So let me just say a few things. One, this report was finalized during the initial phases of the global pandemic and the implementation at the time of physical distancing measures around the world, which, as you know better than anyone, have contributed to an explosion in online gaming among children, yes, but among all age groups. The unique circumstances in which we've all found ourselves in the last couple of months highlighted something that you already knew, that we all already knew, just how integral online gaming is as part of 21st century leisure and entertainment, and how online games can offer children great opportunities on how to collaborate, how to learn, just have fun. What's bringing us together today, though, is something else that we're collectively aware of, and that's that gaming can also generate risks for children, and that these risks, they need to be addressed. So as we consider both the risks and the opportunities, we're also well aware that online gaming is a massive industry with massive influence, real and potential, on children. And clearly this comes with responsibilities towards children and their rights. With online games drawing the time and attention of so many children around the world, the industry is really pivotal in terms of meeting those responsibilities, which we see as fundamental and at the heart of business activities and decision-making processes. So these recommendations that we're talking about today, they were created to help online gaming companies in efforts to gain a holistic understanding of their impact on child rights, and they've been written in ways, we hope, that might be embedded as considerations within their businesses. We really hope that you'll find the guidance useful and that you'll continue engaging with us on our collective efforts to provide the best possible experience for all children to enjoy gaming online I really look forward to this short hour that we have together. Thanks so much for listening. Over to you, Josiane.
Thank you for that, Wavina. Let's move on to taking a closer look at the recommendations themselves and also where this all started. So you might ask, why does UNICEF look at online gaming at all? So as Wavina started to explain, the digital environment itself is becoming a really very important area of work for UNICEF in many ways. Children are going online every day all around the world, and we recognize that understanding their lives and experiences means that we have to build a better grasp of the digital environment where they're spending so much of their time. And online gaming is a particularly important element of that because playing games is one of the most important online hobbies for children in many parts of the world. And that means engaging much more deeply with the digital environment in general, but also with games is an important reality when it comes to advocating for the protection of children's rights. And that was a large part of the inspiration for the first phase of this work, which was the creation of this discussion paper on child rights and online gaming back in 2019. From that point, we understood that companies also wanted more practical level recommendations for further improving their approach to child rights in a more systematic way through their everyday business practice. So that's what this document, the recommendations, tries to do, which is to translate the language of children's rights into the language of the industry so that these considerations can be incorporated more easily in everyday business practice. And also, as Wavina said, this was done with the inputs of many industry players, and we're very grateful for that. The recommendations were also inspired by promising practice by several companies that were identified, and we hope this will promote more widespread and consistent adoption of those practices. But it's also important to acknowledge at this point that the recommendations don't mark the end of these discussions. There are several areas and questions that are unresolved, and that's why we should see this as a step forward on a journey together and not the end of the road. So a little bit more about what these recommendations, who they're designed for, and how they're designed to be used. So we understand that the online gaming industry is extremely diverse, and there are many different types of companies involved. So the recommendations are really designed to be useful to a very broad cross-section of the sector. That means developers, publishers, distributors, platforms, etc. And the aim of the recommendations is to help all companies assess their current practices and identify areas to improve or make a difference in relation to child rights impacts, and to make them as practical and accessible to different types of companies in the value chain as possible, including companies of different sizes. They're presented as questions. And the intention of this is so that all companies can consider these questions in the context of their specific role. And because the contexts vary so much, not all the questions will be applicable to all companies. It's also important to understand that this is not an exhaustive list of all issues and should not be seen as a pass or fail compliance checklist. It's rather intended to sort of spark internal debate and attention to these issues and make the company own the process of incorporating child rights. And there are also many different ways of using the recommendations. So as a company, you might choose to go through all of the questions systematically, or if there's a particular topic that's particularly relevant or of concern for your business, then that might be an area to focus on. But for all companies, especially smaller ones and younger ones, or institutions that teach game development, the aspiration is to incorporate these recommendations so that they're built in from the start with safety and privacy by design approaches from the beginning. We also encourage companies to examine their ability to control and change not only their own practice, but leverage influence issues more widely and encourage others in the sector to also do so. Before going into more of the specific themes that the recommendations cover, I wanted to quickly go over what these fundamental principles that underpin all of the recommendations in the document, and they're applicable to all of the themes that we'll go into next. Firstly, we say that, regardless of regulatory regimes, children have specific rights until they reach the age of 18. As such, they should not be treated as adults when they reach the age of digital consent, whatever that might be. So the recommendations call on companies to award that special consideration and protection to all persons under the age of 18. Secondly, we say that the recommendations here are not exclusively intended for companies who design and target games towards children. We know that children of all ages play all games, including those that target adults. So they call on companies to acknowledge that children might be playing their games and consider the risks and responsibilities involved with that. The third principle has to do with respecting the evolving capacities of the child, and that means companies should seek solutions that can be tailored as children and their abilities mature, as opposed to instituting a blunt age level where children can participate or not. The fourth point is really to highlight that companies should seek to protect all rights holistically, and measures to protect some rights should not infringe on other rights. So that holistic approach means that companies should address risks and protection, as well as empowerment and access and free expression at the same time. And the last point really highlights the importance of addressing all of these issues guided by the best interests principle and taking into account children's own views and desires. Now, to focus in on the specific themes that are addressed by the recommendations, they are organized in the same way as that initial discussion paper on child rights and gaming, because that was those areas that were identified as the most relevant from a child rights perspective. So the issues are, firstly, healthy gameplay or gaming time, inclusion and representation, toxic environments, age limits and verification, protection from grooming and sexual abuse, and commercial models and influence. That final section provides more sort of overarching guidance on how companies might implement a more formal and consistent approach to consider child rights related risks and opportunities in their business activities. So that involves policies and governance, due diligence and remediation processes, and reporting and transparency. Now, very quickly, before I hand it over to our first speaker, I wanted to share the overall structure of the recommendations and basically what you can expect from this document, taking the example of one of those themes, which was commercial models and influence. So each of the sections will start with an overview of the issue, and it will make reference to the relevant articles of the Convention on the Rights of the Child that's applicable to the topic. And it will also give an indication of from whose perspective the following questions should be answered. It will then go into the general recommendations on the topic as a whole before zooming into a set of further considerations by topic. So each subsection will offer an introduction on the context of why a particular topic merits special consideration from the point of view of child rights. In this case, we have things like in-game purchases, advertising, use of player data, and others. These sections will also flag existing child rights and business tools and resources that have been developed for any company that wants to go further into the issue. So in this example here, we signpost the industry toolkit and discussion paper that we have on digital marketing. But now that we've sort of gone through the overall broad outline of the recommendations themselves, I want to hand it over to our speakers who will share their own perspectives and experiences. And firstly, I'd like to welcome Jari-Pekka Kaleva, COO of the EGDF, to share some words.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on which part of this planet you are. I'm Jari-Pekka Kaleva, CEO of the European Games Developer Federation, EGDF. EGDF unites trade associations representing game developer studios from 18 different European countries. And through our member associations, we represent more than 2,000 game developer studios that employ over 25,000 people. And today, in my short presentation, I will be focusing on 3 points. First of all, mainstreaming child rights perspective. About 15 years ago, I was volunteering for the umbrella organization of youth NGOs here in Finland. And back in the days, we were consulted on the National Review Report of the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And then we were really focused on and stressed the importance of child and youth empowerment and participation. And I'm really happy to see that now UNICEF is bringing these concepts also to the protection of minors debate. Of course, we have to take care of the protecting children from potentially harmful content and market practices. And it is definitely something that industry is already doing through a number of self-regulatory initiatives like PEGI, age rating system here in Europe. But we also have to go beyond that. We have to empower children to express themselves through playing games. And most importantly, we have to empower them to become creators of video games by themselves as well. And I'm happy to see that media education institutions and different youth services are increasingly taking that role on at least here in Northern Europe. Secondly, I would like to remind that many of these UNICEF recommendations are not just recommendations. Many of them are already existing self-regulatory practices covered, for example, PEGI age rating system and code of conduct here in Europe. Many of them are already existing regulatory requirements covered by European General Data Protection Regulation when it comes to data protection and privacy, or European Consumer Protection Law when it comes to the protecting vulnerable consumers. So for the industry, these are definitely things that we are taking seriously and having a closer look on. And thirdly, we need a global approach. Video game markets are by their nature global, and I hope to see that these recommendations will take the global debate on a child right-driven joint approach on protection of minors to the next level, and it's definitely something to build on. So thank you from my side, and there are my contact details if you have further questions after this panel.
Thank you very much for that. And I will hand it over directly to Dieter Carstensen, the head of digital child safety at the LEGO Group. Dieter?
Just unmuting myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dieter Carstensen, and I'm head of digital child safety here at the LEGO Group based in Denmark. Next slide, please. A couple of words on why we engage primarily. So the LEGO brand's mission is to inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow. We recently launched the sustainability strategy internally, where one of our focus areas is responsible engagement with children. So under this umbrella term, we have a focus on how we engage with children through our digital touch points, such as digital games, be that on console, web, or mobile games. All our LEGO branded digital experiences, they are rooted in the physical LEGO brick, a premium play experience with a non-negotiable level of safety. So in 2013, we signed the Children's Rights and Business Principles, which is giving us a compass on where our operations could help protect and promote children's rights. In 2014, we then entered a formal partnership with UNICEF, inviting them inside as a critical friend. Purpose was, and still is, to help boost our understanding on how to improve what we are doing and focusing on new areas where we can make a difference in children's lives. Being a family-owned company, it comes natural to all LEGO employees to embrace a sense of responsibility of impacting positively the lives of families. One tangible way of doing so is to participate in the making of the recommendations for the gaming industry. We know many things, we do many things right, and that said, we know we can improve, and we want to improve. We want to learn and be inspired, we want to help others where possible, and collectively improve a sector that has seen a surge of children using their services and experiences. The moment is absolutely now. Next slide, please. Like many companies, we have policies and guidelines that helps the business develop the experiences correctly. Like many, we assess risk and eliminate or mitigate them as needed. It is a cross-departmental effort, and we continue to learn new things or view all positions through a lens of innovation. So the challenge is ongoing, and what works well today may work less so tomorrow. So we can hardly ever work with absolutes and permanent positions. I've listed a couple of the continued discussion points that we have internally, and also not only internal discussion, but also see what we are confronted with in discussions outside the company. So children's well-being, in terms of nudging and notifications, how do we approach this? What is good, what is right? How far can we go? How far do we want to be seen to go? How do we approach digital safety, social engagement? How do you provide a safe social engagement without stifling the ability to communicate or engage with others and still reporting or enabling children to have fun in there? What reporting functions do we provide to them? And data privacy, what names can they use? Are they their own names, or should we create random put together names so they remain anonymous to the others in public? In-game monetization, how can we maintain trust, still have a business, but how do we do this? Do we implement spending caps, high level of transparency? Is that sufficient? How do you do that? So questions are just coming on and on and on. So having the recommendations from UNICEF coupled with our policies and other guidance, we are able to expand this list of topics to address, refer to them in discussion with our partners, and invite colleagues to adopt an approach where we address them. Next slide, please. So some immediate next steps. Josie asked me to more or less come out with not a commitment, but at least say what would I like to drive forward going, having read these recommendations. And I think first and foremost, we need to compare the notes. We simply need to look at what are the recommendations in its totality, how do they fit into what we're doing currently, where are the gaps, and what are the highest risks that we need to cover. As I said before, I think we're doing many good things, but of course we can always improve. So that is going to help us at least give us an indication and direction for where we need to do. Two areas that we are looking into for sure is, of course, empowerment of children. We need to bring advice in context. It has to happen when they are there, then they need to be given the right advice to what is right, what is the expected behavior we see and want them to have, but also provide tools for them to tailor the experience according to what they want to do. Family settings or parental controls, as some may call them. Informed choice needs to be given or taken or you need to informally make the choice on behalf of your children what kind of social features you want to enable, and we want to help families understand what is actually behind opening up for certain social features. And we need to promote the recommendations to our partners and beyond, so we can collectively lift this agenda, which we need to do. And I think it's important also to have the same reference and the same language, so we understand that this is actually a starting point. It's not a start, it's not the end point, but this is where we start the conversation with the right words together. I think that sort of concludes my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dieter. I'll take a moment before handing it over to our next speaker to point out that we have a Q&A function. So if you have anything to ask or comment, then please go ahead and submit that. So now I'd like to invite Lars Torstensen of MTG to share some further perspectives. Lars?
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is feeling okay despite very difficult circumstances. And thanks for inviting us both to participate in the crafting or in this report, but also to share some of our thoughts on esport and gaming. My background, for the ones that I have not met, I have been both within the investment community, but also within telecoms, an important part of also the gaming community, especially as gaming is moving mobile more and more. I am one of 3 that is part of the executive team of MTG today. I would like to take the opportunity actually to also send some flowers to Christine Hertzberg, my former colleague that's been contributing to this report. But not just that, she's also been pivoted and moving the needle when it comes to sustainability work, both for gaming as well as esport. And she has also been the creator of the sustainability framework that we are currently executing on today at MTG. If I may take the next slide, please. So esport and gaming are still fairly young industries, and by that also immature. we feel at MTG that they are surrounded by misconceptions and a lot of misunderstandings. Some of them are, of course, well deserved, but some are not correct. And hence, we at MTG, we feel that through our investments into some of the strongest assets across this industry, we feel that we have an important role to play here when it comes to both informing as well as educating the industry on topics such as children's rights, as we're discussing today. Hence, it was very relevant for us to participate in this work and to support UNICEF when it came to input and data points that are relevant. It should be said that the way we look upon it is, of course, that gaming is a fluent phenomenon. It doesn't just end with playing a game or participating in a game for a child, but also taking a lot of influence from the heroes of gaming, the big stars, the professional players, and that goes then both from influencers, single players, as well as teams. So when we talk about gaming as a concept, we feel that it goes across the full entertainment spectrum as well, including then, of course, media assets, who is sponsoring, and everyone needs to contribute here to make sure that gaming grows up and becomes a safe place for children to learn, act, and play. If we take the next slide, please. Just to give you just an idea of how we are addressing it at MTG. Once again, thanks to Christine that has been formulating this principle around how we go from words to action. I think that is the crucial part also that we need to discuss today across this video conference. That we move from a great report to something that is also showing some real results. As I earlier mentioned, the way we look upon it at MTG is, of course, that we need to take care of all our investments, and that then goes across gaming studios and also to esport arenas and competitions. And the way we inform and support our companies is, of course, that there are some things that are back to comments of earlier comments by speakers, is that there's a lot of hygiene questions here that already needs to be in place when it comes to gaming. But there are also some focus areas that we need to put some extra effort on. And there we feel that several of the items mentioned in the report fits in very nicely. It comes to education of both the people within the companies, but also the children, and also, of course, the parents and the caretakers. But it goes across internet safety and also the way when it comes to behaving in the right way when playing games or even competing with games. And then we have some things that we at MTG feel that we should take a leading role within, and that is then the health and well-being of the people and stakeholders being active in this space. And then, of course, children is a main focal point for us and our group companies. But also that there is a fair arena for everyone to participate, that everyone feels that they have a chance to be there in a safe manner and also under good circumstances. And I will leave it at this. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussions today across the panel and also with UNICEF representatives as well. But these are the thinking behind MTG's approach towards sustainability matters in online gaming and also esport. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lars. Our final speaker is Tracy Rembert of CBIS, who will be sharing some investor perspectives on these issues. Tracy?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Thank you, everyone, so much. I just wanted to say a few words about who we are. CBIS stands for Christian Brothers Investment Services, and we are an investment management firm with offices in several countries worldwide. And we have been investing solely on behalf of Catholic institutions since 1981. And through that history, we've engaged on number of environmental and human rights and social issues, as well as governance. And throughout that history, have tackled children's rights and risk in a number of different ways. And here's just a sampling. One of them that is specific to this conversation is an engagement that my colleague had led in 2005 with retailers of video games. So this was before streaming, when you had to go into a store and buy a game, but just inappropriate content and lack of ratings and warnings related to, you know, really graphic violence or strong sexual content, racist themes, etc. So engaging retailers to both educate, I think, buyers and users of games. And CBS participated in guidance for companies around that effort a number of years ago. Next slide. So we as an investment management firm are really looking at a specific issue right now, which is child sexual exploitation online. And we have been engaging companies globally since 2016 on this issue. So this list of, you know, integrating child rights throughout your investment process is limited to us and the types of investments we have and this particular issue. But if you look more broadly at children's rights, this list would be much longer in terms of just some of the foundational things I think investors are starting to think about in incorporating children's rights into the investment process. So clearly we at CBS are engaging with companies, and online gaming is one of those, I think, industries that is increasingly important to us on child sexual exploitation online, just looking at the numbers of children interacting and the risk that is growing related to grooming and inappropriate contact. But you know, we also focus on when we're voting at any companies and how we hold management to account for both high-level controversies that might involve children and just kind of day-to-day strong practices, and companies being reactive or proactive to risk facing children. And so this list is really just, you know, some of the low-hanging fruit that you can tackle when looking at children's rights and on child exploitation online specifically. Next slide. So when we think about online gaming, and in particular an issue like child exploitation online, which is covered by the UNICEF guide, so I was really happy to see that, there are a number of things that we think about as investors. And one is really getting back to those safety by design principles that, you know, Dieter had mentioned, but we also look at a number of leaders in this space, including the Australian E-Commissioner and the work that they're doing on safety by design principles. And it's really going back to, I think, our much earlier work 30 and almost 40 years ago with, say, toxic chemicals in the environment. And it's called the precautionary principle. Thinking about both the risk and opportunities from a product or service that you're getting ready to launch, and what are the implications for children in how you are going about that business. I mean, that's, you know, at its simplest form. And we really don't see a lot of companies writ large in our portfolio, but definitely tech companies. You know, the mantra of Silicon Valley was like one of a big company, move fast and break things. And we're like, no, slow down and think through unintended consequences of things before launching, because we can see the legal risk, the regulatory risk that builds out over time, and not thinking through some of the safety implications of products and services. And that's definitely true, I think, with online gaming and the intersect with children and the growing cadre of child users that are, as a parent to a 7-year-old, I can say children are very excited if you listen to them to tell you about their gaming experience and, you know, how to roll that up. So here's just a list of some things that we focused on. So one is that really the incorporation of safety by design principles into the design, R&D, and planning stages of new products. And what we have gotten some companies to agree to do that we've engaged is doing a child rights and risk impact assessment across their business lines. So really looking at the rights that children uniquely have and how the business or the product or service might impact those rights as a company rolls those out. Another is we see time and again, whether it's inappropriate child data collection or controversies like actual child grooming and child sexual abuse material, is we really want to see companies be more proactive instead of reactive during a scandal. I think it just bodes well for risk management processes in general. And how we, hold companies to account for egregious harms to children, like I said, is voting against management items and or against board of directors when there's a high level controversy. And we definitely pay attention, like with an issue like climate change and lobbying, we also pay attention to what companies are doing. If they're saying that, oh, we really prioritize the rights of children, and yet they might be lobbying formally or informally or through their trade associations against a number of children's rights at the policy level. And then how companies and industry associations can really do a better job globally, since a lot of this material is used globally by children, on more consistent labeling around inappropriate content, but also when there might be inappropriate contact through different types of technologies. And sometimes I think that's unclear to caregivers and parents when children might be interacting with strangers and what that process looks like. Next slide. And so just to wrap up, because I definitely want to leave time for Q&A, thinking about what do investors need? And one is clearly disclosure, better disclosure. And this is just a sampling of 2 slides, this and the next one, of something that I like just because it was easy, it was simple to understand, and we like to see just more consistent sampling of different data points. But here, this is from Discord, and when you go and look at the enforcement of their community guidelines, they break down all the different types of things that they're looking at. So you can see here exploitative content is 6.7%. And then they break that out differently than threats and self-harm and other issues that might be impacting children. And then the next slide. And then they're breaking down, which users, what was the context of the enforcement of their policies. So they both have a number of different types of charts like this, and note that this is last year's data. But looking at, the growth or not of certain types of the inappropriate content and or, the issues that went against their community guidelines and how they were enforced. And it just makes it easy, I think, for investors to understand when a company is performing well or not on an issue. And they don't just have the slides, but they have, a short bit of commentary that talks about where they've seen growth, where they have had challenges with enforcement and other issues. So I'm not holding this up necessarily as the leading practice, but just something that was, just very easy to understand, and the need for investors to have much more disclosure about what's going on, particularly around risk to children, but more broadly, the risk that the platform is facing, and building some consistency at the industry level and at the global level, I think, for numbers that investors can compare companies to, because that's what we really need, is much more comparable data across types of companies. So there's a lot to get into, but I'll just stop there so that we can go to some closing remarks and then some Q&A. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Tracy, and all of the speakers for those really, really interesting and valuable perspectives. I want to say a few words on what comes next and the next phase of the work before handing it over to you for some Q&As. The key message and takeaway point right now is that we would really love to see these recommendations taken up and used and implemented inside in the internal processes of companies, have them spark debate and action, and become a working document inside of companies. And as we said before, this is not the end of the road, but it's a step on a journey, and we invite all of you to remain engaged with us on the process. Tell us about your experiences of implementing the recommendations, areas where you encountered challenges or found best practice, and share suggestions on how to improve the guidance. As we said, the recommendations are also not exhaustive, and they do not close all of the issues, and there are areas where we can look at much closer and develop more detailed guidance. So over the coming months, we'll continue to reach out to you and go through a process of defining priorities for the next generation of this work, and we'll definitely keep you all updated on that. Please go ahead, and we have some time now for Q&A. You are welcome to post your questions in the box, and you should also be able to write comments. I see one here. How is the industry responding to the increased risks to children in COVID quarantine? Would anybody of our panel from the industry like to address that?
Perhaps I could quickly reply something on this. So first of all, the good side of the games industry is that all our services are usually created from the outset to become highly scalable. So it also means any kind of tools for the protection of minors in online environments as well. So although the number of players has increased, it has also meant that the tools themselves for the protection of the minors have been able to scale up with the amount of the users. But that's just a baseline. On top of that, here in Europe, there has been a number of national campaigns for increasing the awareness of the good games to play for the minors, and also increasing the awareness of this kind of protection of minors tools, that now that children have been playing more games, also the parents are more aware of the different options they can take to actually secure that they can explore the world of games in a safe manner.
Thank you. Would anyone else? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, Tracy, please.
Just a quick add-on to that thought. When engaging some other social media companies the last 3 months during the COVID pandemic, one issue that came to play with some of the largest social media firms are they had a lot of outsourced content moderation, and those moderators are handling very violent extremist content and child sex abuse material. So when COVID happened and a number of people had to work from home, those moderators weren't allowed to do that job at home. So I would, I guess suggest that for online gaming platforms that have a significant moderator workforce that might be dealing with inappropriate content and that can't be done remotely, looking at the compliance and kind of legal systems, particularly if you're a smaller online gaming firm, to see, if there is a situation where the moderators for the online games would have to work remotely, what are the legal and compliance issues that you need to think about, particularly if child grooming or sex abuse or major violence or self-harm, something like that is occurring on the platform, and you need to make changes to protocols to deal with that. Dieter, go ahead.
Sure. I want to go a bit back to what Jari was mentioned. So we didn't actually see, we saw increase of number of users in our services for sure. But we also saw an opportunity to address families because they were together. And these times provided maybe new opportunities and spaces where a child could engage with the parent online, which may not have been as easy before because the parent was busy doing the daily lives of getting back from work, cleaning, cooking, doing whatever. But now they would have together time, quality time, and this also provided opportunities for the parent to help the child engage more safely, more responsibly, in a conscious way, and making this choice together. And on the other hand, the child can then teach and educate the parent of, I'm here, this is what I'm doing, and this is why this is fun for me. Please try and understand. I know I've gone through painful sessions with my kids trying to understand why a certain game, I'm not going to mention it, was so interesting to them and why they needed to spend money to buy a certain item in there, which I never understood before. Now I gave in and say, fine, that's fun. But these moments, I think they were unique compared to where we were before. And I think that's something everybody really cherished because it was an opportunity. So what we did was basically provide guidance that was heavily inspired, almost a 99.9% copy of what UNICEF, it was actually a copy of UNICEF's recommendation of how parents, they could engage with children and have these conversations to have a safe online gaming experience. So I think it was a blessing in disguise for actually opening up for these dialogues, and hopefully we'll have more of these dialogues to come with less of the background for why this was happening right now.
Thank you very much. I see Anne Becker from ISFE has her hand up. So I believe, Anne, you should be able to speak now if you'd like to make a comment.
Thank you, Josiane. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank UNICEF for organizing this seminar. I think it's very, very helpful to see how the recommendations have been structured, how you would like to see them to be used, and also I think the fact that, you know, this industry is so incredibly diverse and innovative, and it's evolving all the time. So the approach of having a rather flexible approach, I think it's very welcome. Specifically on COVID, I just shared online what ISFE, ISFE is the European trade body working closely together with EGDF on representing the video game sector. We published some specific tips to parents during COVID, and we also created a COVID-19 resource page where we saw that a lot of our members, but also other video game companies, made available resources for educational or health purposes, etc., for free during COVID, and just pointing to existing resources. I think what our colleague from Lego just mentioned is that what we also saw is the fact that parents and children were also together at home. This was also an opportunity for parents to discover their children's sometimes favorite pastime, play together with the children, and understand what is also part sometimes of their online universe. And what we're seeing in regular research that we're doing is that parents that play together with the children, that engage in their activity, they have a much better dialogue, control, etc. over playtime, over spending. There are much less arguments coming from gaming in families where parents actually take time and engage with their children in this pastime, like they would do in any other offline activity, you know, football matches, dance lessons, etc. So this is an important message that we think is also one part of the puzzle, is to increase that awareness, because we have the digital world all around us today, and it's an enormous challenge for parents to see how parents manage that online interaction, but also how you manage this in the family and for your kids in order to have this healthy and safe interaction. So we're looking forward to learn more about the recommendations. I mean, we have them now, But I think that also to see the examples of Lego and MTG, how you have approached this exercise is really helpful. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Anne. Do any of the panelists have any reflections on that you would like to make? If not, then we have an interesting question here from Julia Fossi. How can we all better promote the good practice that is taking place by gaming platforms regarding safety by design so that these, it has now disappeared off my screen, excuse me, while I find it, so that these can act as catalysts for further innovation. Does anybody have any thoughts on how we can do this?
I can give a couple of thoughts here. So we've engaged with the Safety Commission and Julia in the consultation period of drafting the safety by design principles. And I think what we went through is sort of a process of going through and commenting on things, you also understanding how to approach certain angles of your business in a different way with different lenses. And the safe by design is of course a principle we've been practicing for quite some years, I would say almost since day one. But when you expand it out and you articulate it in the way through principles, then it also becomes, as I mentioned in my intervention, a language that you can start using when you are in communication with your partners, because you hardly ever do things on your own. You're always engaging, learning, or collaborating with other partners. And I think that is where this language comes in. And these reference libraries are essential to having a conversation where everybody can refer to the same thing. They can understand that this is a cross-sector document that really represents the thinking of a variety of stakeholders. So it is a balanced approach that is agreed to, and that gives a direction for where we need to go. So we would use it, and we are using it in our conversations with our partners who are publishing our Lego branded IP games. We are addressing these issues in our cross-sector trade association discussions, but also associations with other companies and different stakeholders, referring to them and indicating that these are the guiding lights that we need to be focusing on and help us interpret them. It is, again, a language, and I think that's really the strongest point I have here. Thank you.
And perhaps to just add something on that.
Yes.
As just mentioned, it's of course something that has been existing in the industry for years already. And it's also something that is not only safety by design, now coming from the UK debate, but it's also the European debate on the privacy by design and data protection by design, and all this combined. So I can see that there is now a big trend in the game design debate on actually taking this kind of practices to account and making them visible, so that we are now entering this kind of phase where we are actually starting to figure out how to implement these in the best possible way in the industry. And one of the crucial things that is perhaps sometimes forgotten in this debate, that it's not just enough for the industry itself to work with the safety by design, privacy by design, and data protection by design. It's also something that we have to take to the game education. The educational institutions teaching game education have to start to adapt their curriculums. Unfortunately, if you are working for higher education institutions, the adapting curriculum is some rather slow process. But I hope to see that this would be part of this kind of basic education on becoming a game designer, and through that really mainstream it in the upcoming new among the top talents of the industry who are emerging now.
Thank you for that. I also just want to highlight that this aspect of how can we all better promote good practice and have these leverage and catalyze further innovation is a very interesting angle and question that we have the opportunity to look into this much more closely in the next phase of the work. I see another question here, although I confess I don't understand but I think my colleague would like to make a comment, so I invite you, Eric, to come in.
Thanks, Josie. Just as context, so I also work in the children's rights and business team with Josie, and I was leading the gaming work before she came on board. So the way I understand your question, Rami, it's about different kind of age ratings and what should be the right answer here. So I'll try and answer it with that in mind. So first of all, let's say that there are a number of different considerations around age rating that throughout this work we weren't able to fully come up with the sort of UNICEF position on. And this means that we are going to keep looking at these, primarily the age of digital consent. So watch this space. But just to say, so you have different kinds of age rating. You mentioned Peggy here, for example. These are consumer-facing recommendations. So it's about content and it's about features of the game, to advise children and parents on who they are appropriate for. When we talk about the sort of rights conflict here, it's more, I think you're more referring to the age of digital consent, so the consent to collect and sell data. And this is a tricky question, and it's been discussed in many ways in different legislatory processes as well. But just as a very sort of, from a child rights perspective, of course, the freedom to access information, the freedom to participate, the freedom to socialize with others are fundamental rights in the Children's Rights Convention. And this shouldn't be limited too harshly to age ratings of younger children. But there is the evolving capacities of the child of how they are able to actually interact with this safely. So in a sense, setting an age where children can access information and socialize online, it's hard to say a sort of fixed age. It depends a lot on what the context is and how this works. On the other hand, the collection of data and the ability of children to consent to the collection and use of their data is a different question from a child rights perspective, but they're all often baked out in the same deal, right? So you have a product that, in order to use, you have to consent to the use of your data. And in that one, you also have, from a child rights perspective, some questions around at what age are children actually able to understand what they're consenting to and give that consent, or in lieu of children, their parents. So I can't give you an answer as to what age is the right age. There are a number of different ages proposed in regulation, and you'll see 13 to 16 probably being the most common. But from a company perspective, think more about what is the context and the product you're looking at, and how can you make sure that you give children all the information, and their parents, of course, all the information to actually make an informed consent as to the use of the product, as well as the collection of your data. So from a child rights perspective, that's sort of as far as we go in the recommendations, but this is something that we will study further and hopefully be able to clarify a bit more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That is, go ahead, Tracy.
Oh, just very quickly, I think on a positive note, there are a number of opportunities for the online gaming community to think about empowerment of children. When you think of inappropriate contact and content, etc., I've seen some examples of just children being empowered to call out other players, other users on a number of, harassing and inappropriate types of behavior, and how that's had a ripple effect of really, empowering other kids to step up and call out bad behaviors. But also going back to the point of many of the other speakers, that this is, I think online gaming is one of those first main points of interconnection between caregivers and children in opening up the dialogue about the child's online experience. And in our work, working on child exploitation the last number of years, that is, I think, one of the most important points on child online safety, is building up that communication so that when children do encounter problems that infringe on their safety, that they, are opening up to parents. And just a quick note that CBIS has worked with a number of investors and UNICEF and other child protection groups over the last year to come up with investor expectations for protecting children from sexual exploitation online. And that guidance will come out at the very end of this summer. And online gaming is one of the type business models that we look at in terms of spelling out investor expectations for the industry, you know, just from the investor perspective on protecting children from sex abuse. So I look forward to having conversations, hopefully with some of you once that rolls out.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I think we are now officially out of time. Thank you so much to all the panelists. I will hand it over to my colleague Andrew to wrap things up for us. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Josie. I'm assuming you can all hear me.
Yes.
Good. So some key words coming out of this, I think: empowerment, innovation, opportunity, managing risk, and I think key one that was said right at the beginning, but I think it's worth reiterating again and again, and that is fun. We're talking here about an activity which is a lot of fun, and it's important to keep that in firmly in mind. So what's it all about? It's about building a sustainable future in which social and psychological well-being is maximized. And that we're doing that by building an innovative, sustainable and responsible present. And the industry is part of a much wider agenda in a sense on that. And the industry is not alone in the whole aspects of taking on issues around children's rights and the contribution that they have towards building a sustainable future. And we're looking forward in UNICEF to continuing to work with the industry to explore and address the challenges and to learn from mistakes and from successes. I think it's important that we recognize, obviously, that things don't always go well, and we're not finger pointers. We're here to learn from that and to look at what can be done to find ways of addressing things that don't go as well as we would like them to. And looking forward to celebrating that with the industry. And our challenge to you is take it on. I mean, UNICEF is involved in this work, but it's involved in the work with the industry. This is not a UNICEF project as such. It's about UNICEF offering a certain kind of perspective, a certain kind of take, a certain kind of technical input from a rights perspective to the industry in terms of how it develops, how it builds itself, and offering a friendly challenge to take it on. So we look forward to you taking it on and running with it, like many other sectors have done in different ways. And so finally, just to thank Wivina, my colleagues from UNICEF, Wivina Belmonte, Eric Nyman, and Josiane Gallia-Baron, for their contributions to the webinar, particularly Eric and Josie, who've been instrumental in taking this work forward with the industry. Obviously, Dieter Carstensen from the LEGO Group, Jari-Pekka Kaleva from the European Games Developer Federation, Lars Torstensen from the Modern Times Group. I think I probably should have just said TAC, basically. There seem to be so many Scandinavians on this call. And Tracy Rembert from the Christian Brothers Investment Services. And above all, so those of you who logged in for this and joined the webinar, please keep involved and don't hesitate to follow up with Josie and Eric after the webinar if there's things you'd like to discuss further. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.